the Christmas story, and we're listening to some of the main characters or main players in the story.
Yeah, their voices, which is a great thing to say.
Which is really odd when we come to this week.
Good point.
Because we're calling this Christmas Voices, but the guy that we're talking about today,
he has no lines.
Doesn't say a word. No lines in the entire story. We're talking, of course, about Joseph, the stepfather, the adoptive father of Jesus, non-biological, and he adopted him, and that's basically the whole story. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah.
It's really not
it does seem that way. There's very little with Joseph in there, but as we were digging through it, there's always more and more. So the whole purpose that we're trying to do is look at the Christmas story from Joseph's point of view. And we're going to try to go through chronologically and pick out various points and extrapolate on what we know.
And since there's not so much, we'll see if there are other things that Joseph was a part of that we can
exactly. Which really, last week with Mary, we had to do less of that because there was so much more.
So much stuff. So,
right. Yeah, so kind of interesting.
Yeah. So who was Joseph? What do we know about him?
Joseph was a guy.
Right?
Right. He lived in a little town way up north by the Sea of Galilee called Nazareth. So he was a Nazarene. Small town. What would we say? 250, 400 people. We don't really know, but not a whole lot of people. His father was named Jacob. And it actually says that because in both Matthew and Luke, we find the lineages in there. And it's interesting because they're different from each other. I think they run different too. One runs backwards of the other one, if I'm not mistaken. But one of them says Joseph's father was Jacob, and the other doesn't.
Right.
So you want to take that one? No, the Bible's wrong.
I think that Matthew gives Joseph's line. Okay, through Solomon, which there's a whole thing in there that we don't have time to get into. There's actually so we don't have time to get into it, but there's a curse.
He's going to anyway.
Hold on. There's a curse in Joseph's line between Solomon and Joseph. There was one king got cursed, and in Jeremiah, God says, write him down as childless. None of his kids will ever rule. So if Jesus had been the biological son of Joseph, he could not be the king of Israel. So we go to Luke 3, and we find another family tree. And this one goes back to David too, but it goes back through a different son. It goes back through Nathan, not Solomon, which means it can't be Joseph's. Right. The only other option is Mary's. Right. So when it says that he's the son of a different name, I'm thinking father-in-law. Because we're still tracing the male, family tree down there. But Jesus can rule biologically as the son of Mary, even though, is only the adopted son of Joseph.
Right, and both of them go through David.
Yeah.
Either way, which is interesting.
Either way, you go back. Yep. So you trace both of those trees back to David, and then they're the same, obviously.
All the way up, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It says that Joseph was a righteous man.
And that sets the tone for everything else that we see about him.
Yeah, and it's interesting, in the Bible there's a lot of righteous people that you would see, but do you think that being righteous was something that was common, or was it really, elevated to only a select few?
That's a good question. I mean, the definition of righteousness means right with God. So he obeyed the law, he did his sacrifices, he paid his tithes, he prayed when he was supposed to, he went to sin. He did all the stuff that he was supposed to do.
But it also seems like that righteous, that righteous has to have a heart aspect.
Yep.
Because a lot of people did that, but they weren't righteous because they were just following the law or the rules for the rules' sake.
Yep.
Versus something else. So there does seem maybe there was a little something extra in there.
Which really brings the whole, fleshes out the whole picture, because we have Mary, who's called blessed, and she seems to have the right attitude, and we have Joseph, who has the right attitude. God didn't just dump Jesus into some, well, I guess you know,
you're good enough. Yeah.
You know, we've got two people who really care about loving and serving God, knowing Him better, loving Him more. Right. We got two people who are really concerned about that.
Yeah. Well, and like you had said previous to me, you know, God picked Mary, but He also picked Joseph.
Yeah.
And that kind of says it all. So He picked the right guys.
Yeah.
Or right people, right couple. So Joseph didn't want to disgrace Mary. Right. So they're engaged, and it seems like they followed the normal engagement, the normal rituals for what was around there.
Yeah.
We know that they weren't, you know, wealthy or ultra wealthy, but they also don't seem to be dirt poor.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so they have something.
Yeah, they're not out in the fields, you know, picking up pieces.
Right. Yeah.
But we'll see in Luke that they are poor. You know, until the wise men.
Yeah. Right. Right.
They won the lottery.
Yeah. So they're engaged, probably an arranged marriage, like was there at the time, and then Mary all of a sudden, from Joseph's standpoint, turns out pregnant.
Yeah.
And he seems to have problems with it as a righteous man. Okay, I'm going to divorce her.
Yep.
But he decides that he wants to do it privately.
Yeah.
You know, so not make a public spectacle about it, just privately.
Yep.
And then he's visited by an angel of the Lord in a dream.
Yeah.
Now, I thought it was interesting that Mary was visited by an angel.
Yep.
And Joseph, in fact, I think 4 times he's visited, always in a dream.
In a dream, yeah.
So is there a difference?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, why would it be in a dream versus, you know, Gabriel pops in?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I do find it somewhat funny though, because how many times did Mary say, "But the angel said," and nobody believed her,
right?
Until Joseph had a dream, and the angel said, and he's like, "Oh, okay."
but you kind of don't know, right? Right. That's an awful lot for a family or even a spouse to take without some kind of proof.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she was gone for 3 months. She didn't look pregnant when she was gone. All of a sudden, she's back. You know, it's been however long. You know, at least 3 months. And he's like, "All right, who's the guy?"
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. So Joseph was told in a dream he decides to marry Mary. Then he's also told what to name the baby, which I thought that was kind of cool. Went back to Elizabeth and Zechariah, right?
Yeah.
Zechariah was also told what to name John.
Yep.
So that was kind of interesting. So now they have a big trip they got to take, right? So they're in Nazareth. She's pregnant, and there's a census. So they have to go down to, and how do they decide? I mean, I know so they go to Bethlehem because that's the city of David,
right?
But not everybody ties their lineage to David. So other people would have gone to other spots.
Seems like it, yeah. Because at least in Israel, now we don't know a ton about this, right? Well, I don't know a ton about this. It was a Roman census, first of all. It was not a Jewish census. It was a Roman, as far as we can tell. Well, yeah, Caesar Augustus sent the decree that everybody. Let's not forget that there were still 12 tribal lands. So they were from David, from Judah. So they were going to have to go down to Judah somewhere. So now we're in Judah, okay? And so now the different clans within Judah are probably going to have their locations.
Right, everybody have their different spot.
Right. So, you know, city of David, okay, if you're from David, you're going to go to Bethlehem. But if you're from somebody else in Judah, you're going to come.
Yeah. And Bethlehem is about 5.5 miles south, a little bit west of Jerusalem.
Right, so it's within that region, yeah.
So about a 3.5 day walk. You know, obviously it depends on how fast you walk from the northern part of Jerusalem, from Nazareth to Bethlehem.
Well, and if they were there, we don't know how long they were there, but it says that while they were there, it came time for her to deliver.
Right.
So how many restroom stops are you going to have to take between here you're taking a pregnant woman with you, right?
Well, here's other things we don't know. Who all went?
Yeah.
Right. So we know Joseph would have gone. We know Mary went. We don't know if she had to or not.
Right.
But does that also mean that Joseph's parents had to go? And if Joseph's, if everybody's going, well, that means all the kids have to go.
Right.
And if all the kids are going, that means all the animals have to go. And if all the animals are going, you have to take all your food and clothes.
Yeah. So did
And now it's
Nazareth
a huge-
shut down for a time period? All of these other places, or was there? Nazareth is in a tribal area, right? So did some people move up there?
Stay in their house? Did they swap houses?
Well, this was like an early Airbnb going on. Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. But there's you got
you also
Zebulun,
said something
you got Dan,
about
you've got all these other
maybe they went down in waves too. Like maybe part of the city went down, and then when they came back, the next set went.
Yeah.
So we think of a census is going to happen, in a day or a week, and it could have taken years.
Yeah, at least months.
Yeah,
at least months. I would think. Yeah, I don't know. That's an area that I just really don't have a ton of information on.
Yeah,
I'm sure somebody out there does.
Yeah,
it's not me.
So at least Mary and Joseph are down in Bethlehem now. It's time for her to deliver, and that was another interesting thing. If not everybody had to go, why would Mary have gone with Joseph?
Yeah, I don't know.
She's pregnant. Stay home.
Right. Yeah.
But we have no idea Mary's home life. If she was welcome there anymore. Maybe she got kicked out. Anything that happened.
Yeah.
So, anyways, they end up in Bethlehem, and they're at an inn because they're in a manger because there's no room in the inn.
Yeah.
But that's our story, right?
That's a traditional translation. Really, it wasn't an inn like we might think of, motel or something. It was probably there was no room in the guest house. But again, not guest house the way we think of it, because there would be these large houses with lots of rooms and families would live together. Well, if Bethlehem is small, then there's probably a lot of people who came in for this census. And you got people stacked and bunking together and everything, and you got this pregnant lady. Well, we don't have room to give you guys your own space. Right. We can't afford to give you your own room. Well, what space do you have? Well, the only space that nobody's living in right now is downstairs in the back, in the where all the cars are parked.
Yeah.
Think of it that way, right?
Right.
Because if you got your donkeys or you got your whatever that you're riding in, where are they going to be parked?
Right. But it would have been warm there.
At least
they would
shelter.
have been taken care of.
Yeah.
And there would have been at least some quietness there, or privacy, I guess would be a better word.
Yeah, probably not quiet if there's a bunch
of
animals, but private. Yeah.
Oh, they were all quiet at the birth. Don't you remember?
Oh yeah, Silent Night.
Scene? Yeah, right.
Silent Night in the nativity scene where they're all just sitting here like this,
Right. So we know Joseph was at the birth because shepherds came to visit Mary and Joseph.
Yeah.
So and I think we talk about shepherds next week.
Yeah.
But from Joseph's standpoint, he was at the birth, so he was there. Then after the birth, 8 days later, there would have been a circumcision.
Yep.
And then from the birth, 40 days later, there's a purification a ritual purification that Mary needed to go through.
Yep.
And then Jesus, there was a dedication service.
Yep.
Because he was the firstborn.
Yeah, under the law, God claimed all firstborn children and animals. These belong to me since you're my covenant people. And it goes all the way back to the Passover in Exodus. As they came out of Egypt, God claimed all firstborn. For those who were not in covenant with him, the blood on the doorposts and everything, he claimed them by killing them. For everybody else who said, yes, we are in covenant with you, he claimed them for himself and said, you're mine.
Right.
So.
And then at that purification and or dedication, whatever we want to call it, that's where we find out that they have to do a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And that's where we find out how much money they have.
Right.
Because there's a couple different options depending on how much money you had. They chose the 2 turtle doves, which would have been or 2 doves, which would have been the lesser of the options, the lower of the options.
Because in the law, God says, when you make this sacrifice, this is what you have to sacrifice, or this is your other option. Pick A or B.
Right.
Unless you can't afford it. If you can't afford even this one animal, then you can do the 2 pigeons or doves. So they were so poor that they could not afford even that one animal to make that sacrifice.
And if that was 40 days after the birth and they had no money, that's also where we get the wise men hadn't come yet. Or
That's one of the
reasons
why we know the wise men had not come. They were not at the manger, they were not at his birth because they had no money still.
Right.
40 days afterward.
Right.
But that brings us, because that really is the whole, and we're already 40 days outside of the Christmas story, and Joseph we're still not done with Joseph's part of the overall story. Matthew chapter 1 mentions him, just, he had the dream, Mary. Chapter 2 goes into the story of the wise men, which I think was probably, upwards to maybe 20 months later. I think he was somewhere between 18 and 24 months. Right. And Jesus, obviously. Right. The reason I think that is because we know the story. The wise men came to Herod. Where's the king of the Jews? We don't know anything about this. Go to Bethlehem. Herod said, kill all the babies 2 and under in the surrounding region. Not just in Bethlehem, but in the whole region.
Right. So most of the time we think just in Bethlehem.
Right. But Matthew actually says the surrounding region. Well, if he's in Jerusalem and Bethlehem's 5 miles away, let's just call that a radius.
Right.
Okay.
Which means the number of babies, huge, right? Because now Jerusalem could be in that mix too.
Right. But again, you're talking about boys 2 years and younger.
Right.
So it still wasn't, there's still obviously
not thousands and thousands, but...
Right. And the censuses had been over by now, long time, because we're talking a year and a half or more. But here's the thing that really gets it for me. Jesus has a cousin who's only 6 months, or a relative who's only 6 months older than he is.
Yeah, John the
Baptist. We don't hear anything.
Just thinking a little 2-year-old call him John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, you go. It's his middle name, right? We don't find anywhere that he was ever in danger of this.
Right.
Now, that's an argument from silence. We got to be careful with that.
Right.
But if that's true, then that means that he's probably older than 2. And since there's only a 6-month difference between them, that means Jesus is somewhere younger than 2 because he's in danger, but older than 18 months because John is more than 2.
Right. So somewhere in there.
That's when the wise men finally show up. So Jesus is at least a year and a half old, and yet Joseph and Mary have decided to stay in.
Yeah, they didn't go back.
They didn't go back home.
Right. So for this period of time, it sure seems like you go for the census and you go back.
Yeah.
Right. So we were kind of brainstorming, why would you stay? And if you have a carpenter, if somebody's trade is a carpenter, and you are now 5 miles from Jerusalem, your potential jobs just got real big.
Yeah.
Instead of a place where there's 400 people.
Yeah. If you're working a trade, you go to where the trade is needed.
Where the people are.
Well, and let's here's an interesting thought, is that Herod spent about 46 years remodeling the temple. He wanted to make it really great. He wanted to make a name for himself. Okay, now he died before, so there's the whole wise men thing, right? And then he died. So is it possible that Joseph, as a tradesman, a carpenter could mean wood, could mean stone, could mean a lot of stuff. Is it possible that Joseph was actually part of that remodel team? Because there was work going on in Jerusalem under Herod's direction. We got government contracts here.
Yeah, and we need people.
And we need people, and people
it was
need
definitely
money.
Manual labor.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
So there's an option. Obviously there's speculation, but there was work going on in his trade down there that there may not have been way up north.
Right. So, approximately 2 years after Jesus' birth, Joseph has another dream. And in that dream, the angel tells him, get out.
Get out.
Go to Egypt.
Yep. And right after the wise men, right?
Yep. Yeah, so that's a key point, because more than likely the wise men helped fund that trip.
If they're bringing gold and frankincense, we don't know how much. You know, it could have been a little satchel, but you know,
but
it's more than 2 turtle doves.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Right. So they go to Egypt. We don't know where. You know, we're talking these villages of 400 people. Now it's a nation of Egypt. Stay there for a while. Herod dies. His son takes over.
Right.
Hey, we can go back home.
4 actually. 4 of Herod's sons. Rome split up Israel into four territories.
Right.
That's why when we see Herod in the rest of the Gospels, it's not the same. Obviously, not the same Herod the Great. He's called Herod the Tetrarch. Tetra is a fourth, right? And so Joseph is like, or he gets the dream. You know, the people who were trying to kill your son are dead, so it's okay to go back. Where does he want to go back to?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting.
Judah.
Yeah. Right, so he's going back to his new home.
Yeah.
You know, not where he came from, up north by, Sea of Galilee.
Yep. And that's where he had business and contacts and everything for the past year or two, whatever.
So it must have been good.
Must have been good. He was going to go back there. Probably had a home, the whole thing. And then he found out which of the sons got that region. And he's like,
He's taking on, he's a lot like his daddy.
I'm not sure which... wow, I don't know what to do. So what happens? An angel comes in a dream again.
Yep.
4 times, for somebody who gets no lines.
Yeah.
4 times an angel comes to him, says, this is what you should do, and he did it immediately.
Right. It's part of the righteous.
That's,
right?
He's
a righteous man.
Yep. And I think that's really, I think that's probably a fairly decent place to stop with Joe, because that's
it's also where he's at.
Right.
He does show up one more time when Jesus is 12. They go back to Jerusalem. That's when Jesus gets left behind, and they have to come back.
Lost.
And then we don't hear anything. Anymore.
Then he's just referred to. Isn't this Joseph's son? Isn't the carpenter's son or whatever?
So we at least know that Joseph was around in Jesus' life for the first 12
years. Yeah, at least. Right. But I think the cool thing is, as we think about Joseph with no lines, right? He's a righteous man. He does what he's told. He does it with the right attitude. He's born. He has no lines. He dies. Had he not, if we don't have the Bible,
we know nothing.
We know nothing about it. We barely know anything about him as it is.
Right.
But isn't that pretty much like your story and mine?
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, we're born. We do the best that we can. And we die. Nobody knows who we are. We're not celebrities. We're not, big
after
names.
A generation, maybe 2 generations.
Yeah.
We're done.
We're pictures, we're memories of a handful of people. But here we are, 2,000 years later, still talking about Joseph, somebody who really has no Christmas voice other than his actions. And I think that's really cool.
That's way cool. And that's a great place to end up today, too.
Yeah. So be like Joseph. Be like Joseph. Be righteous. Do what's right with the right attitude. And it doesn't matter if you get any lines in this play that we call life, because God knows. And that's really all that matters.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's one of my cool things. That's one of my favorite things about Joseph. Yeah. Well, I hope you found that beneficial. And we'd love to hear your comments. You're going to have more lines than Joseph. If you make any comment at all, you get more lines than Joseph. What do you like about his story? What do you like about Joseph and how you read through here? We'll be back next week with another video in the Christmas story. And the next week, I think the guys actually have some lines. So we'll get to do that. So
not a lot, but they have some.
That's right, yeah. Joseph actually shows up again in next week's story. And I think he's no lines, but I think it's interesting in my head anyway how this plays out. So.
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you back here next week. thanks for being a part. Thanks for joining us in the video. And I hope it's helpful. Bye.